so welcome everyone. Yeah, Taming Tech Monster. I'm gonna I'm gonna have to show it. That's the book, and that little techie here. He basically explains everything. He basically shares what feels like a scary monster is really just a friendly dragon that wants to play. So that's the essence, core message of the book, and that's also what I'd love you to take away from today. So I'm going to share my screen, and I really would like to dive right into myth busting, because I think that is at the core of it. I work with coaches, therapists, authors, speakers, people who have a big idea, who want to create an online business so that they can offer their services online and basically reach more people and have more impact. And tech often gets in the way of that. So there's all these big ideas, and then when it comes to actually making this happen, then it's like, oh my God, where does the button go? I don't know. And there are a few myths that most people, fall into the trap of them. And before we go anywhere, I want to share with you that I was one of those. And when I first stumbled into the software industry, when I moved to Australia in the mid-90s as a freshly qualified translator, language teacher, enthusiastic about taking the language world of Sydney in by storm, and very quickly found out that real life didn't quite work that way. It was very hard to get a job as a translator, and then when I finally had one, it turned out it was the worst paid job and the most stressful job I ever had, still now looking back. And so I knew I wasn't going to last in that industry, and I literally sent my resume to anybody who would have it, and ended up in a software company. And so I noticed all these tools and toys around and started to explore, and I could quickly see that that's where the future was. But at the same time, there was this giant sense of overwhelm. Like, where on earth am I even going to start? I'm way too old for this to even get started with this, and I will never be able to catch up. And by the way, I'm a woman, I'm not really that technical anyways, it's not really my thing, and like, no way I'm going to be able to make this a career. But then, curiosity took over, and one by one, all my beliefs around what tech is and isn't, and how that can be explored and learned and mastered, reality basically took over. And slowly I could see that none of these things that I had gone in with were actually true. So I want to basically dismantle them before we go anywhere else. So I'm too old, right? So I was about 30 at the time, or 30 something, and I was really worried that I was too late. It was too late for me to get started. Everybody else had, years of games programming, and everybody was nerdy and could do all these things that I didn't even know existed. So there was definitely that sense of it's too late for me. Now, what I learned is that, well, there's some people that are young that are good at tech, and then there's some people that are older and they're good at it, and everybody else hasn't got a clue. So I've worked, actually a couple of years ago, I helped out in my partner's mobile phone shop for a while, and quickly got to see, right, that young people quite often have what I call quick thumbs. So they're very quick at writing messages, but they don't have any clue of how all this works. And, and sometimes older people are tech savvy or not. So I would like to encourage you to think about, who do you know who's young, who hasn't got a clue? And who do you know who's older than you and is actually quite savvy? So in my experience, it's, just being young isn't going to save you. I'm a woman. Tech is just not for me. Now, I grew up in East Germany, and in East Germany, they kind of didn't tell us that women aren't supposed to be technical. So even in the 70s, in the 80s, more than 50% of engineers were actually women. engineering at universities, all the technical fields, half and half women. They just forgot to tell us. So what if this doesn't have anything to do with gender either? Like, do you know a woman who is geeky and technical, and do you know a man who isn't? So in my experience, being young and male definitely doesn't save you. Now, technical, like how technical, like I've never been good at science and maths. I've not suffered from that too much, but it's definitely something that's quite common as well. Now, to that, I want to say, and we'll come to that later, that 80% of the work involved in using online tools to build an online business have nothing to do with technology. And that's not usually where the problem is. The problem is that you try and skip steps, right? So that's usually where the problem shows up, that a tech tool asks you to do something and you don't know what to put there, but that's because you've jumped into that space way too quickly. So most of the work, and I have a little, it's almost a game, that when somebody works with me, I always catch them saying at some point, oh, I'm really looking forward to working on the website because it's so much fun. And then I was like, well, did you just hear yourself say that? Yeah, because when we're actually working on building something to offer online, they get to realize, well, it's actually a creative process. It's like, how are we going to do this, that, then there's problem solving, there's coming out and thinking out of the box and coming up with new ideas. And everybody enjoys that, right? So it's, what you need to know is probably a lot less technical per se than you might actually think. Hang on. Oops, my slides. So yeah, if you now, let's take as an example, choosing software tools, right? That's because often there is where the problems actually show up. When people come to me and say, hey, I want to start an online course, I want to start a membership, the first thing people ask, oh, what platform should I use, right? And that's such a jump ahead question. It's like walking into a hardware shop where you say, hey, I want to build something. Nobody can help you unless you know a little bit of what you want to build and how you want to use it. And because if you haven't got a clue, then you can still go in the hardware shop, but you can browse and you can have a look and you can allow what's there to inspire you. Some people enjoy that and some people don't. So if browsing and trying out different platforms isn't something you enjoy, then your best bet is to take a step back and think about what it is that you actually want to create, right? And a lot of people go, I just want it to be simple, right? And that's a very dangerous ground. So you want to have something simple, but not too simple, because that's where what you usually hear online when platforms trying to get you to sign up, they will kind of come around, like you can see here. They will try and make things sound really simple, but you can't hide the complexity. So if you get, and I won't name platforms because I'm going to get in trouble, there's quite often platforms that say, oh, just come, just sign up for my platforms and tech's going to be taken care of because everything's under one roof, right? And then people sign up for that and they start trying to set this up. And then there's a sense of, what is all of this stuff? There's the total information overload. There is like, you don't know where to start. And then what happens, people think, oh, this is supposed to be simple, so I must be really thick, right? And that's when if you've ever felt like that, I really want to encourage you, take a step back. That's not your fault. There's basically a big chunk of the process that they're not telling you about. And then a classic example is mobile apps. How often have you seen build your own mobile app? 3 clicks, no, in 5 minutes, no coding experience required, right? And technically, but really, really, literally, it's not a lie. Well, these platforms are built so that you don't need to code, but they basically put it in a way that now, even if you've never built an app before, you can just use these platforms and drag some pretty buttons onto a screen and off you have your mobile app. But if you then try, you find, well, because they don't tell you that, yeah, okay, you don't need to code, but you still need to know how to take a process that you want to streamline and translate that into data in a table. And then take this data and put it on a screen and figure out what that button, like, you still need to know how to develop an app, right? So for somebody who knows how to develop an app, the tool is great, but they make it sound as if it's easy for everyone, and that's just not true. And the same is true for website builders, the same is true for all-in-one platforms. There's always, you still need to know how a website is structured and how a menu and how all that works, even if the tool doesn't require you to code, right? So there's basically a whole area of expertise in between that nobody talks about. So people will sign up for platforms and feel overwhelmed because nobody tells them that they do actually require some knowledge that, I think platforms probably think if we tell people that, and if also we tell people that the learning curve's kind of like this, and then that people might not sign up. But I think disappointing people and having people discouraged, I think it's a lot worse. But that's basically what happens. So if you've ever felt lost in a platform or thought this is way harder than I imagined, it's because like nobody tells you about all the steps in the middle that, that you can't even ask about if you don't know they exist. So, you're basically not alone in your struggles. So the way to actually approach this down is then really to, I call it like slow down to speed up. So if we're taking an online course platform as an example, you want to start and you want to offer an online course. Now, before you go to platforms and think about which one should I sign up for, the way to approach this is to say, well, wait, okay, so how do I actually want this to work? If somebody decides to sign up for my course, they hit pay, check out, pay, now what? What should they be able to see? How do you want them to interact? Like, should there be a video? Should they be accessing all these certain downloads? Should they get everything at once? Or maybe they should get something every week? Is there a group? Are there live calls to go with it? Do I want to offer payment plans? So you really need to just take a step back and think through how exactly you want that program to run. And you'll then quickly see that the functionality that, like the things that you want to do almost literally translates into functionality platforms have. So once you know how you actually want this to go, then you know what to look for in a platform. So you're not totally flying blind. Now, functionality is one element to take into account. Sometimes you also need to, you always want to take into account the learning curve that's involved. And it's not always about whether you're capable of learning it. You're always capable of learning it. Sometimes the question is the amount of time and effort involved in mastering this platform worth the project? Like, classic example, when I published my book, I wanted to offer somewhere where people could sign up for more resources. And so I wanted a platform, where people needed to give their email address, but then had access to all sorts of stuff. So nothing really complicated. And on top of it, this whole book, that's a story for another day, it was published in 30 days. So there wasn't a lot of time to now, explore a whole new platform. And I'd seen one that I thought I wanted to explore, and I signed up for a trial account, and I looked at how this worked. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to take 2 weeks for me to get my head around this, right? Might be interesting, but boy, not for this. So in that case, I decided the learning curve was way too steep and way too long for what I wanted to do. So I chose a different one. So sometimes it's worth learning and sometimes it isn't. Now, the other thing to always keep in mind is you want to use what you already have, right? So it's not, there's a lot to be said for familiarity. Like, if you don't want to just throw everything out because somebody says, here's a new platform that does it all for you. Like literally see what you can do with what you have to start with, right? So all my favorite quotes are from Einstein. And so make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. So it's just like learning another language. Like when you start learning a language, if you start, I don't know, like English is my first language. So after the first few lessons of English, I don't attempt to read Shakespeare in the original. So you basically start out finding your way home, back from the bus stop, and then you explore the territory, you explore it from there. So the same you want to do with tech. So you don't want to just go in and have this automated everything, when that just leads to overwhelm and you spend way too much time in that rather than actually doing what you set out to do. And so there's, when it actually comes to finding a platform or something, like, well, Google is your best friend. Like, I mean, if you do anything, one thing I see all the time when people post on Facebook, hey, what's the best platform or whatever? And that's such a rabbit hole. I don't think anybody has ever gotten anything useful out of that, because people don't know what you need. People just post the platforms that they've heard of, and that usually adds to your overwhelm rather than takes away from it. So you want to go to Google, get yourself a short list, and when you've done your homework before, when you know what it is you're looking for, then you get down to a short list pretty quickly. And then you want to go to the pricing page, because that's usually where you can see what's available in what plan. So, and you don't have to sift through all the marketing fluff. So you can literally go, what does this thing do at what price point, and makes it a lot easier to make a choice. So yeah, now and there are a few practical tips that can make your whole life online a lot easier. And the first thing that I love sharing is the art of asking the right questions. And I tell you a story around that. There's a friend of mine came over and she said, do you have a hairpin? And I'm going, no. And she was about to head out. And I said, wait, what do you want a hairpin for? And she goes, oh, you know what I did? I've got this padlock at this door in the shed, and I put in the wrong key, tried to open it and broke off the key. Now I've got this bit of key sitting in there and I can't get it out. And so I think hairpin would pull it out. And I'm like, well, I don't have a hairpin, but I think a tatting needle will do just fine. And she goes, what's a tatting needle? Well, if you're into lace making, it's a lace making needle. It's a sturdy, longish needle that's fine enough to get into this. I thought it would work. So we take the tatting needles and we pull out this piece of key. Now, what she'd done, she had a problem. And then she came up with a solution. Ooh, a hairpin will do. And then she went and asked for help and asked for the hairpin, right? So now, I don't know what problem she wants to solve, right? So most of the time, and most of the time, what we do, and we all do it, when the field isn't our area of expertise, we tend to jump to asking for help with the solution that we've come up with. The problem is when the area isn't your area of expertise, the kind of solutions you come up with aren't usually the best ones. So, and you don't give neither Google or the person you're asking the chance to actually bring in their knowledge to help you. And the first time I really saw like an example of that in the online space, it was just literally the pandemic had started, and somebody asked me, hey, how can I compress a video? Well, why would you compress a video? Well, I need to email it. Why on earth would you email a video? And she goes, oh, you know what? I used to do these workshops in person, and now I had to do them online, and I need to send out the recording from the Zoom call. So you could literally see, she didn't know how all this worked. So she had the recording. She said, oh, I need to send it to people, email. So she went to the email client, put in recording, attach file. She selects the video, and the email thing goes, meh, file way too big. Must make files smaller. So now the thing is, if you ever tried to Google, and I did try, how to compress a video, the answers you get, you're in the world of codecs and video editing, and it's a whole rabbit hole, and it doesn't get you that much closer to what you actually need to do. So for her to get an answer that's actually helpful, or not just for her, or for my friend, or for anybody, is when you actually type in your problem, when you literally say, hey, I've got this problem, can you help? So if my friend came and says, hey, I've got this padlock with the key stuck in there, do you have something that we could use to pull this out? Or if the other person had come and says, hey, I've got this call recording, how can I get that to the people who signed up for the workshop? Whole different question, a whole different set of answers, and usually way more helpful than us coming up with what we think the solution is. So give that a try. You know, anytime before you ask something, either Google or a person, just take a step back and ideally just type in what it is you're actually trying to solve. Yeah, so we can stop that one. Reading the documentation. Oh, that's a big one. That's a big one. Like when you try and explore anything, people learn in different ways. Like if you've ever bought a washing machine, right? So the washing machine comes and there's all these dials, and people go, well, I don't know how this new thing works. My old washing machine was much simpler. So there's two types of people. Some will go and get out the manual, like that would be me, and and other people go, oh, we'll just fiddle around with the buttons and see what works. So neither of those approaches is wrong. So everybody does what makes sense to them. So the only tip I'd give is like when you hit a wall, when you kind of like, oh, this doesn't make sense, don't spend hours wasting trying to figure it out, because I see that a lot. When, for God's sake, just check the documentation, like just read the help documents. And especially in the online space today, there's so many times there are little onboarding, little walkthroughs. And so often I see clients when we work on screen share, there's this like, oh, I don't have time for that. I just want to go straight in. And when you really look at it, you usually don't have time not to go through that, because they usually take 2 minutes, but it gives you an overview of how things work and what's available and what the best place to start is, rather than trying to poke around when you don't really know how it works. So yeah, documentation is definitely your friend. Yes, I think it's something that if you've ever learned another language, like you'll relate. If you go and read a text that you don't really understand, if there's a word you don't get, well, you can brush over and you still get the gist. You might get it wrong, but you usually pick up something. But then there's another word and you're so lost so quickly, and getting through that text quickly isn't going to help you at all, because you get to the end and you haven't understood anything. So the same is with dealing with tech. Trying to rush through it isn't going to help you. So if you don't jump over things, don't brush over things that aren't clear, because you just get to the end and you're entirely lost. So, and yes, it'll be slow, well, yeah, if you kind of read one thing and then, oh, don't know what that is, and you need to explore what that is, and then it can be a bit of a rabbit hole. But I think slowing down is definitely what will speed you up in the long term for sure. And yes, error messages are your friend. It's very funny how often I see people, there was this error, it didn't work. Okay, what happened? And there was this error message. What did it say? Well, I don't know. I closed it. Classic conversation, right? So the thing is, an error message usually tells you what's wrong, right? So people kind of and that's where we come back to these early myths, right? So when people see an error message, just says, oh my God, tech hates me. I knew it. My dad, who said I was useless when I was 5, was right after all. This thing never works for me. And people go down that rabbit hole so fast. And I've seen people like literally physically kind of like, now, what if you just relax and read what's on the screen? Most of the time, it'll actually tell you what to do. And if it doesn't make sense, then you can usually take it, grab it, copy it, and Google it. I've done that with code in proprietary systems, and there's always somebody else who has the same problem. You're never the only person who has the error message, and there's usually, sometimes somebody gives you an idea of, oh, I could try this. Usually there's somebody who's had the same thing, said, oh, try, do this, do the other thing. So most of the time you'll actually get an answer. And even if you don't, at least you know that you're not alone. So definitely you always want to, or at least take a screenshot. You can help if you contact support. Well, they can't help you if they don't know what's wrong. So error messages are always your friend, even if they have a little red exclamation mark. And so yeah, I think the last thing I want to leave you with is embrace a learner's attitude. If it's a big field. It's I quite often, I actually did this in an interview, and it was funny because the lady I spoke to was a lawyer, which I didn't know in the moment I said that. It's a large field, right? So if you decide, hey, I want to be a lawyer, so what are you going to do? You're going to watch some YouTube videos? No, you go to law school. And how many? You're going to probably spend a few years at law school, and then you come out and you're a baby lawyer, and you know it, because then you have to go and get experience and actually get good at the field. Now, when it comes to online tech, people, for some reason, quite often have the sense, oh, well, I should really know all this. Well, what if that's not true? What if that's the same as become a lawyer or become an engineer? So you're going to have to basically learn what you need. And so, and the other part of that is, oh, I just want to hand this over to somebody young to do it for me. Nothing wrong with outsourcing, but I always say, be careful about, don't do fear-based outsourcing. Don't hand it over to somebody else because you don't want to deal with it. I always recommend to people, learn enough to be a good client for somebody, because that's what usually happens when you haven't got a clue. You're vulnerable, and you get taken for a ride, and people sell you things you don't really need, and basically don't act in your best interest. So for you to get an idea, at least an overview of what you need and how it works, is definitely in your best interest. And at the same time, you want to give yourself some slack and not expect too much too fast, and take one step at a time. And so nobody's ever sent back a washing machine, because everybody works off the assumption that I don't understand it now. So either I fiddle with the buttons and figure it out, or I read the documentation. But every single person I've ever come across works off the assumption that you have what it takes to figure this out. And how would you approach this if you knew that you had what it takes to figure this out?
Great. Anke, very good. Thanks for going over that. I've got some follow-up questions. You sparked my curiosity on lots of things as you shared that. I appreciate where you're coming from, as I've been a technologist most of my life, and so I remember learning things and growing, and I'm naturally curious about that. But for many people, they've been thrust into the digital technology world. And one of the great things about technology now is I call it a very much a level playing field for everybody, because it's so easy to get into and to leverage to do work now, which doesn't matter how old you are or where you live. You can really use these tools to really become effective in your work. And so I think the work you do is really valuable there. But then if you're not a digital native, if you've used that term before, right? The people who are brought up with the native training of all of that, if you're not a digital native, then it is like a foreign language. You say, well, how do I enter into this space, learn enough of it so that I'm using it to my advantage, not taking advantage of, not being buried in the weeds on it, and use it. So I think this is real appropriate, especially for our learners who are obviously, I tell them in my classes, and my entrepreneur classes and business classes, that they have enough technology knowledge already, the fact that they're on this Zoom call with us, to do many, many wonderful things from a standpoint of work. I mean, that just proves they have enough already to get started, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think about the learning curve, and that's the part that scares a lot of people, because there is so many options and there are so many people promoting solutions and, get rich quick answers and courses and classes. And this is how 3 steps to do this and that. And it's just overwhelming. And knowing how to even sort that out is really a bit of a challenge. But give us some of your thoughts on the idea. If we go back to kind of pre-high-tech days, in most companies, the leader of the company would not do every aspect of the business. I mean, the whole solopreneur is kind of a new idea, that one person can do everything. It's really not true. There's no unicorns. None of us are that good, right? We fake part of it. We're really good at parts of it. We need help in other parts. But for some people, technology, if it's a necessity of their business, there's nothing wrong for them getting help there, right? That's really what I think you're promoting here, is that, hey, you can get some help. You need to understand it, but there's some, you can get help. You don't have to know A to Z all of this. You don't have to be the master of this. You can have somebody in your corner that you trust that can kind of help on your team, or that you hire to do this. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I totally agree. Like, I think we sort of start off, when you're sort of by yourself, you sort of wing it all, and everybody has areas that it's their genius zone. It's like, that's where they want to spend much of their time, and then there's other areas where they think, oh God, it's just not my thing. The only but I want to bring in there, I think technology is one of those crucial parts. Like, I always compare it to finance. Like, nothing wrong with getting an accountant. Like, yeah, it makes sense to have an accountant. It makes sense to have a financial advisor. But you wouldn't go, oh, I don't like, look, this money thing, that's just like, here, have my account details, you do it all, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, hopefully you're not doing that with your finances, right? So I'm basically saying, you want to approach tech like you would approach your finances. Right. So you want to you want to be a business owner. You want to take ownership. You don't want to just like, oh no, I don't want to deal with it here. And you know how people throw their passports over, and I don't want your passport, go away, right? So it's like, it's the same thing. Yeah, sometimes people do hand over their financial affairs to somebody else just to find out that they have nothing left and somebody else is living on the Bahamas, right? So it's just, you're vulnerable if you don't. I mean, if you have somebody you can trust, who can literally explain to you what you need to know, and then you can go and get somebody else to do the work. Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know. I work with people who are tech savvy. I work with people who are like, I don't know. I don't want to know. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I've seen is usually the resistance melts away when people, because nothing's as addictive as progress, right? I've got a client, when we first met, it was funny. It was really funny. Like, she'd written a bunch of books, no online presence. You need to be somehow visible online. So there's a website and this and that, a whole bunch of stuff. Now, in the very first conversation, so, okay, how are we going to share files? Do you use Dropbox? She goes, no, go away. Like, literally, she was like, I don't want to, go away with all this stuff. I want nothing to do with it, right? And so, well, okay, fine, not a problem. And so we started working again, like this and that. And all of a sudden she goes, well, I can try this. And then she tried one thing, and then she tried something else. And all of a sudden, I saw her, she sent a message, she says, oh yeah, I live streamed the Zoom call into my Facebook. You did what? So, and now she will go, she says, oh, I love tinkering with the stuff because I can be creative and I do my own YouTube thumbnails. Same person who didn't want to go near Dropbox, right? So it's like when you actually start to explore something and then you have a little success and like, oh, and that's what I'm saying, like make these steps. When it's hard, you're skipping steps, right? So it's like the moment it feels hard, it's like running up 5 sets of stairs when you're not actually a runner, right? So it's make the step smaller. So if the step is to save the chat on a Zoom call, well, then that's the thing, right? Figure out how that works. And then once you've got that, and people then start getting curious. Ooh, what about this? And then all of a sudden curiosity replaces the, ooh, this thing is against me. And then they surprise themselves what they can do. And then that translates. And I have a client, like she's 70 and she goes, you know what I did? I went and I bought a modem. Well, I was told it was a router, but I told her to give me the thing and then I installed it all by myself. So she got the internet working all by herself, right? And she was also, she said, I would have never even tried. So it's incredible how much fun this can be when you start, so to get those, I mean, that's the thing, the objective never is to turn anybody into a programmer, because if you wanted to be one, you'd be one, right? So it's about not being one of those clients that, be a good client for somebody, know enough so you have an idea of, you can recognize a good service provider when you see one. Right?
Yeah,
so I think you just want to know, you want to know enough to get help. Right?
Yeah, it's building on those little wins so you build confidence to keep going.
Absolutely.
Don't take too big a bite. Just do the little things and build some confidence.
Tiny bites.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think I know that no matter what I think up the problem is or something I can't figure out, somebody's already solved that problem. And with Google, with YouTube, with videos, you can go find somebody. I always tell people on YouTube, you can find 10 ways to do it right and 5 ways to do it wrong. Just go through and kind of figure out which one's which. You can really do, you watch enough videos on that stuff, you can get an idea of who you like and who you don't, and you can listen to get bits and pieces of that. Absolutely. And turn up the speed at which you watch those videos. You don't need to listen to somebody ramble on at their slow pace. Just turn up the speed and get through those videos faster. You can knock them out quick. So,
and that's the thing. It's like if you ask the right, I mean, if you put in the problem rather than what you think the solution is, the videos that come up will be a lot more helpful.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's always fun when I go down that path, because you start to, and then I've recommended videos that are related, and you start to see the answers come running at you if you're open. Yeah, the good thing about our GetSetUp community is all our learners are lifelong learners. They're curious, people motivated to learn, and that's what makes working with them so fun. So one of your points was that, and I think they all have that characteristic going for them in that sense. One of the tensions I see with business and in this process is trying to get results from a business person and not getting stuck in the weeds of the process. Now, the process is important. You mentioned that. It's important. You can't not have process because you won't get results. But some people are more process bent and not result bent, and they struggle with that, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Well, that's the thing. It's like you always want to. I can't remember, like somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they basically said, well, you want to spend your time today working on things that make your life easier tomorrow, right? And I think sort of. Just keep it like that's what I think. That's what I like. That's how I interpret Einstein's quote: like, make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. Say not simpler. And I've got a beautiful example of what too simple means. Right? Somebody I remember says, "Hey, I want to do a workshop, an in-person workshop. So how can I take payment?" Right? And so everybody, it was in a Facebook group, right? So everybody went in there. Oh, just put a PayPal button. And I'm like, oh, big problems. It's one of those. Yeah, the PayPal button takes like 2 minutes to do. And boy, do you create yourself a lot of work afterwards, right? because then like she went with her PayPal button. And so I'm not popular when I say, well, okay, instead of spending 5 minutes to do the PayPal button, spend 20 minutes to, basically make sure they sign up and they get a little ticket thing. So spending 20 minutes up front to have it easier later isn't always popular. So she went with the PayPal button, and then the day after, people go, hey, how did the workshop go? And she goes, oh, it was lovely. But boy, it was exhausting. Like at the door, like people were coming and I didn't know who'd paid and who hadn't. Right? It was a giant nightmare, because then like all the things, like you have the PayPal button, people pay, there's an email address. Now you have no way of knowing who's paid. Right? So it basically going too simple in the front, like on the outset, then you create yourself a whole bunch of work afterwards. Right? So it's the same, oh, I just use a spreadsheet. Well, if it's working, great. If it causes you a lot of manual error-prone, annoying admin tasks, well, then that's perhaps a solution that would kind of deserve a little bit of attention to think, how can we make this so it costs less of your time going forward.
Do you adjust that a little bit in the beginning? I mean, startup is the hardest part, right? Going from zero to something is the hardest. And a lot of people get wrapped around the axle trying to make everything perfect, because like, oh, I don't want the shortcut right now. But sometimes you need to take the shortcut to get launched, right? Launching is so critical to getting started. With in mind the idea that process follows. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think you cannot have a process just like you can't make the process up. Like the process will reveal itself to you as you make mistakes in the beginning, right?
Yeah, it evolves.
Yeah, you have to, I think, especially with like, oh, I want a funnel. No, you don't. Like, especially when you start out, you want to talk to people. You need to figure out what it is that you want to offer that people actually want to buy. That's your focus, right?
Yeah.
And so, well, yeah, if you can do that in an email, even better, because it's just getting lost in the tech rabbit hole is a giant waste of time, right?
Yes.
So you cannot, and I always say, like, you cannot automate and you cannot outsource a system that doesn't exist yet. Right. So I think like taking a step is more important than taking a right. Like, what is right anyway? Like, you're not even going to know.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to take a step. And maybe, and especially when people first come out, it's like, oh, so who's my audience? Who's my offer? Well, you're not going to know. You probably need to talk a few that aren't right for you to discover who your people even are. So you can't go and try and get it right first time, because you probably need a few wrong attempts to even discover the whatever is right. So hell no, I don't think there will be a process in the beginning.
Right. I mean, any startup's going to be messy. You have to expect that. It's messy. You've got to push through, and you've got to expect
it's a creative process.
Right.
That's
right.
I think it's a creative process. There is a part, like, it's literally like creating a piece of art. Like, there is a skills element in it. Well, there's only so far you can express your creativity if you don't understand color and proportion, and like, if you don't have the technical skills to draw, to paint. So, well, you need to do that, but at the same time, it's a creative process. You don't know right at the beginning what's going to come out. Right? You need to take the step to, and it's software's developed like that. You kind of say, okay, well, this thing makes sense, like this little bit of functionality, let's just get that right. And you build it, and then you see, oh, no, that doesn't actually, and people don't understand. Okay, let's go back, and you iterate around, right? And so you cannot have the whole path laid out for you, and you sort of figure it out all in your head, and then it's going to be all perfect. That just doesn't work like that. Would be boring.
You mentioned in your website a little bit about working on your inner self as well as working on your business. Can you speak?
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm laughing because I actually think building a business is like the biggest crash course in personal growth. And then, I mean, my first business was a sewing business, and I thought, oh, I just need to have a fast sewing machine, a good fabric supplier, and convince someone to buy a skirt I made, right? And in the end, that doesn't matter at all. The thing that got me, the thing that had me burn myself out, was I didn't know how to say no to people. And that was what had me so exhausted in the end, that something had to give. And then you come out other people who have this thing like, oh, I'd rather be a good person than make a lot of money. Well, try charge your clients with that, right? So that's the thing that's going to be getting you. Like these, if you're a perfectionist, perfectionism, that's an expression of fear. But then you're going to spin your wheels and you're going to try and get it all perfect, and you never start.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's always your inner things that will actually pose the challenges, and they usually come from this like total like left like unexpected.
Yeah.
It's not what you expect, but I think that's I think I've had podcasts, I've spoken to lots of people. Everybody agrees. It's a crash course in personal growth more than anything else.
Absolutely. I mean, you go back to the point. Having a business is a creative process, and you compare that to even like having children, which is a creative process, which those children will change you. Being a parent will change you because you are you're forced to deal with things, and you have to figure it out. And the same thing with the business. Yeah, very much so. So being open to all of that is really important in that process. And, focusing on progress, not perfection. That's always a great mantra to kind of embrace and say, keep making 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's okay. You're still going forward. That's fine. Keep help along the way.
I think it takes like when when people first hear, especially when they kind of like a website, and I'm going like, well, this is version 1, and I go, well, no, and I'm like, well, this is going to be an ongoing thing, and they go, oh, I just want, it's like initially there's this like, oh my God, I'm going to have to deal with this forever.
Yeah.
But it also takes the pressure off, right? It takes the pressure off. It just needs to make sense for now. Right. You can change your mind tomorrow. Like it just really takes that, oh my God, I need to get it right. Like what is right anyway, right? So you just it needs to make sense to you now.
Right. It's very much a work in progress. I mean, our business is a work in progress. Our own personal lives are a work in progress. All of that. Exactly. Sadly, school teaches us that there's a right or wrong answer, and if you get the wrong answer, you fail. And that's really not how life should work, right? That's really that mentality is really painful to kind of take into all of life. It's really not quite that.
I think that's why building a business is so hard, because we're not brought up for it.
Right. Yeah, you have to be perfect or don't try. Well, nobody's perfect, so only the courageous end up putting their neck out and trying it, and reap the rewards of it. Let me shift a minute about your book. You talked about creating it in 30 days. 2 questions I have for you on the book. The first question is, would you go looking back, is that something that really made a boost in your business, in the sense creating a book puts us out there for people to kind of hear us, see us, we get on the radar a little easier that way than we do just by having a website. I know that, so you can speak to that. The other one is just 30 days. I mean, I love the idea of 30 days because some people, they take years to write books for whatever reasons.
Yeah. No, totally. First question, yes, it has made a huge difference in my business, and surprising to me in a way, right? Because I often give it away, right? I'm very kind of, it's not my product, right? It's I use it as as like a giant lead magnet, basically, right? So it's a
promotional tool.
Yeah, totally. But the thing is, the fact that it's on Amazon makes it like it. I've written ebooks before, right? Where just write something and make a PDF out of it, and and so there has been a certain uptake of people, like how people want those, right? The difference between, oh, here's a book that you can actually buy on Amazon, it's just night and day. It's incredible. Right. So, and I've had people like, hey, here, and on a Zoom call, when I'm like, here, I send you a PDF copy, and then like 5 minutes later, she goes, oh, look what I just bought, and they still buy it. Like, it's not even that people don't buy the book, right? So they still buy it. It makes a huge difference. Yeah, definitely.
Good. What about the 30-day
an
process?
Author. Yeah, the 30-day process was basically how this came about, and it was like this is a COVID baby, basically, and I remember in April, a friend of mine invites me to a Facebook group, right? And the group was Your Authority Book was the name of the group. And I'm like, ooh, I'd had this thing like, oh yeah, at some point I'd quite like to write a book, but it was never now, and I was never quite sure what it would be about. I knew it was going to be nonfiction, but that's kind of like, oh yeah, it was one of those one-day projects, right? And so when I heard the name, I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I joined that group. And so it was run by a lady who was out to experiment to see whether she could take a group of people through the process of publishing a book that she normally takes her private clients through. And so she comes out and she goes, well, she does a few live videos over the weekend. And then she goes, I'll propose a project. The ship leaves on Monday and we're publishing a book in 30 days. And I'm like, are you crazy? So I was like, literally, I was like, oh yeah, that's nuts. Like, I don't. But then she said something like, she was basically said, well, yeah, again, like your demons will come up, like your little monkey mind will come and do everything to hold you back from writing.
Right.
And so she was kind of preparing us for all of that. But then there was one thing she said where I knew I was in. She says, your authority book, like a book about your area of expertise, gets edited, not written. Right? And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. She goes, like, you've probably written so many social media posts, blog posts, answers to questions. Like, you've done videos, you've been on podcasts, you've expressed your ideas in a million ways, right? So what the authority book is about is to take all of that and filter it and extract and expand and structure it so that it's coherent for somebody to read, and I'm like, well, that can be done in 30 days, right?
Yeah.
So, so that was all of a sudden, I mean, there's still a lot that got written, right? But literally I started out with a mind map. And so, okay, this needs to go in and that story needs to come in and this point I really want to make. And so all of a sudden you said, oh, okay, well, there isn't really that much to invent. So it's not like fiction where you have to develop plot and character or any of that, right? So that's where, like, if you come at it from that angle, then oh, hell yeah, right? Yeah, you can totally do it. And and I also went in and I thought, oh, well, if it doesn't get published in 30 days, well, who cares? If it gets published in 50 days, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it was out on May 30. So
wow. So is that considered self-published or is there a publisher?
Yeah, no, that's self-published. Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. No, I like that idea. And that's what we should be writing books about. If we're trying to write a book for a business sense, I mean, for a promotional, it's like, what are we experts about? That's what we know most about. We're out of our lane if we start making up other stuff. Then it becomes nonfiction. Then it becomes fiction. We're writing fiction.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's true.
Right. Well, that's cool. We're wrapping up here on time. This has been very interesting and engaging. If anybody has any questions to throw in chat or they want to raise their hand on their Zoom screen, we can take a look at that and see if anybody has anything. If anybody raises their hand, we could call on you. If you've got a quick question here, we could ask Anke about. Anybody have anything pop up? Don't see any hands on Zoom, but anybody in chat? Oh, here's one. Ruth Ellen. Yeah, what's your question?
Hi, Kevin. Hi, thank you. I don't know if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, but this helps anyway. I put in there, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Let me ask you what you think about the nature of this monster, because part of the problem is, probably the greatest asset any of us have to use is our time, especially at this age. And I just feel like the whole tech sector, you can't live with it. You can't live without it. They have this dyed in the wool obsolescence. I get things that work and they're just right. And then something changes, or then it doesn't agree with an update to Google. And it's very frustrating because this is how their business model now is to sell the product and give you very little back. Sometimes now you have to pay for in-person support. And half the time, I bet, Anke, you realize that when you read some of that support, you say, I could write this better than they do. It's like the luck of the draw if you even get a tech person that knows what you're talking about. You need, more than us knowing how to get over the tech, is we need the tech people to come from the other side and see what the end user is using. I'm on a soapbox, I'm a pet peeve, but it came up. But I'm wondering, to that point, since you've done this so much, do you have any little hints, like when you're really stuck? Are there some resources out there, either on YouTube or whatever, that you find are really a good first go-to place when you're at wit's end? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I totally agree with you. And, I've worked in software, and so we always know the people writing the document, like, oh, nobody wants to write documentation. So it's one of those like, yeah, if we can avoid it. And then they, the worst thing is when they, in the documentation, they just explain the obvious. That drives me crazy, right? When they say, oh, click here, print, click here. And I'm like, God's sake, like, that's obvious. Explain the stuff that isn't obvious. So, I think like Googling the problem, right? To say here, type in whatever the platform is, how to do something, or this is what it says, like literally as close to the problem as you can, right? Now, the other thing that I find, if a platform offers live chat support, that's usually a good idea to go for, right? Because you find people there tend to be really helpful, right? And they usually, I don't know, like I don't usually do phone support, but like, or receive phone support, but like live chats, I find they quite often don't have, like, because if you submit a support thingy, whatever, right? And then somebody replies with an email and they go, oh, have you done? So they could just brush you off with sending you to a document that you would have probably read anyway. If you can get a live chat, that's, they usually
I've done that
kind of
too.
are a lot, but you totally have, like, you absolutely have.
I wish I wasn't so cynical to some degree, though, because
no, but you're
the
right.
last thing
No,
I'll
like,
do the chat, and then you're chatting over them, and then they have these protocols like, oh, we apologize for the they spend more time going back and forth apologizing. That gets back to the whole time is money or time is life or whatever.
Ruth Ellen, I just try to find a phone number. I Google a phone number, even if they don't, most companies don't want you to call them, but they all have a phone number. You can Google their support phone number somehow and get a hold of somebody, a real person.
Yeah.
That's where I've gotten the most progress, but you got to be persistent because they make it hard.
Sometimes you have to hang up and dial again, because there's sometimes like huge differences in how they get you. Some will just kind of blurb some whatever, like templated thing, silly response, or they will tell you, like, I hate it when there's like, by the way I asked the question, don't treat me like an idiot, right? So it's like, you get huge variety of helpfulness, right? So sometimes you just hang up and try again. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your question, Ruth Ellen. I wish we had time. I wish we had time for more. We have zapped through our hour here. This is a good topic, and thank you all for being a part of this. You can learn more about Anke by visiting her website and connecting with her on social media. We put those links in the chat here in Zoom. Thanks to our audience here in the front row and also our live stream communities. If you'd like the recording of this event, please email our support team. If you're new to GetSetUp, we hope you've gotten a taste for what we do. We have over 500 classes weekly, all designed for older adults, taught by older adults. The classes are free, and we work with local governments and communities, Medicare organizations who support their members with these free classes. I'll also draw your attention to relevant classes on GetSetUp. If you like this event, we probably have many others like it for you. You can look to sign up in the chat here on Zoom and our live streams and at getsetup.org.